You're here, which means that you've found Spirit Crumbs, leading you to your inner light worker. I will be sharing how these tiny little hints from the universe have led me to where I am today. I hope that by hearing my story and the stories of others, you'll pick up your own spirit crumbs along the way that will lead you to somewhere magical. Thanks for coming along for the journey. Let's see where it takes us. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Spirit Crumbs. I am your host, Andrea McCallum. I am an intuitive reader and energy healer. In today's episode, I'll be talking to Jenny Miller about conscious relationships and breathwork. So welcome to Spirit Crumbs, Jenny. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm super excited for us to talk about breathwork and conscious relationships. Those are two things that I know really nothing about. So I think it'll be great for you to be here and have this conversation.
Awesome. I'm excited.
Me too. And so I was thinking maybe we could talk just a little bit about how we can use breathwork to become more conscious, just in general.
Yeah, for sure. So breath work really helps you get connected with yourself. And by that, I mean like you're taking the time to sit there and breathe and just be in that moment of presence, and really get grounded with yourself. And you're giving yourself that space to let your ego move aside and then your intuition to come through. So what breath work really helps you do is release stuck emotions and trauma and begin to transmute some of that energy that was stuck in your body. Because what happens is that, you know, when we have a traumatic experience in our life, no matter if it was small or big, we generally hold our breath, right? Because we feel anxious and we're like, oh my gosh, right? And we basically, that gets stuck in our body. So now we're taking that time, whether if it's a half an hour of breathing, to really sit with ourselves. And I do truly believe that, you know, you get what you need in that moment when you're having a breathwork session. It might not be something like extremely, you know, big that comes up for you. It could be something small that just needed to move through you in that moment, but it's really giving you that time and that space to do that. And a lot of times, you know, we go about our lives more unconsciously, right? And we don't take that space. So what that does is, again, you're taking that space and you're allowing an opportunity for growth. And becoming more conscious is about growing and bringing awareness to things that are stuck within ourselves, and choosing to move through them. And just by, you know, giving yourself or booking that session or doing a group virtual breath work, you are giving yourself that opportunity, which right there is very conscious of yourself, you know, bringing awareness like, hey, I need this, I feel this, and I feel like it's the right timing to do something like this for myself.
I love that. I think that's such an important point. I've been talking about that a lot lately. The fact that anytime you choose to get a reading, I was talking about this actually in my episode this week. We're recording a week ahead, but I was talking about how it's you deciding to heal yourself, even though there's another person who's like a channel for energy or they're a person who's providing some guidance. You're the one who's making that conscious decision to say, I need some support here. And you're choosing the person, you're choosing the session, you're making the decisions yourself. So I think that's such a really good point to make. And then with breath work, I think that's even more personal because it's your physical body. It's that connection of like sometimes we like to be out in the spiritual world, like, you know, doing all of the like readings and things, but coming back to the body, I think you're right, is such a powerful way of connecting to our spirit as well, because they're so intertwined and we don't make that connection.
Exactly. It's so important to be grounded. You know, we are here on Earth, and I believe it's, you know, you really consciously connecting with the Earth, and then you consciously connect with the above, the sky, right? And our cosmic selves, and we need that balance. It can't be like we're all up in the clouds and not here on earth, right? Like, this is why we're here. Our soul chose to be here. And yeah, just to go back to breath work too, like, it doesn't have to be some, big trauma that you're moving through and it comes up during breath work that may or may not happen. But it can be, again, something small that you just needed to see or hear or sense in that moment. And it gives you, again, that space to just move through that and become more consciously aware of it.
Yeah, I love the point that like it doesn't have to be something big, because I think it's like anything that's like, I just think of it as, this has come up a lot actually, both things we were talking about balance and then acknowledging the smaller traumas, because I've been saying that with grief, how people think it has to be just the death of someone to feel grief when really we feel that all the time for everything we feel like we're losing, but also like the balance of like mind, body, soul, and just recognizing like, yes, even though we don't like it, we are humans, we're not just spirits, like we have to be here on earth. And like you said, it's the same with meditation. I find like you may have a meditation where you're like, nothing came to me, it was really dull, it was just me sitting and like moving through my thoughts. But the more you do that, the more conscious you become. It's that like habit, we were talking about habit just before we started this too, and like anything we do that's a positive thing for ourselves, if it becomes a positive habit, even if it's just taking, I guess, a few conscious breaths, if we don't have time for a full session, it still builds up, like it still makes an impact.
Exactly. And yeah, and for myself, I've had such profound experiences by doing my own breath work. Like, sometimes it is something heavy that I needed to see because I sort of became um, unconscious about it. Like, I was like, oh, that's done with. I don't even think about that anymore. And then once I realized that it was still there, that it was still in my body, I was like, okay, I need to connect with this. So it was just an eye opener in a way. And then I've had other experiences where, I don't receive many visions or visuals, but I the emotions come up and I almost like don't even know where they're coming from. I'm like, oh, well, why am I, crying about this in this moment? And it's because like I needed it, right? So when we give ourselves the space in breath work, we're just allowing that to come up. And sometimes, I might get a message that's just very simple that I was like, exactly, where you're like, oh, nothing really happened. I guess, breath work might have been a dud, but it's like, it still wasn't, because I had, just one clear message that was like, okay, you need to take care of your body a little bit better and like eat more green foods. Like, I've had an experience like that, or just the first time I did breath work was just such a profound and amazing experience for me. I felt totally connected to spirit and I felt very supported. So there's just, I made it sound kind of heavy in the beginning, but it really is what what you need in that moment. And not everyone is going to experience it the same. Some people experience visions, or they hear something, or it's just energy moving through them and they can really feel like, a little bit more clear and calm and present after they do it. So there's so much that can come from it that's just, if you feel called, then I would say that's likely for you. And if you don't, then it's not what you need at the moment. Exactly.
I totally relate to that, because when I'm doing Reiki and energy healings, it's the same thing. Like sometimes people won't feel much at all, but then other people have super clear visions and feel like they're connecting to a loved one. And it just depends on, like you said, what you need in that moment. Sometimes I think what we don't want to admit is that we just need that space to slow down. Like there's not anything we don't need to receive. We just need to stop. Right. So I think that's something valid as well, because I think when you think of like the sessions you offer, like the group ones or in one-to-one, sometimes you just need to acknowledge, like, I need to commit to something just to make myself take that time as well.
Oh, 100%. Like, I'm definitely the person that needs to commit to something sometimes to like do it. And that comes to like whether it's an exercise class, like I need to schedule it, book it, pay for it so that I show up, and show up for myself. So it depends, yeah, on what works for you and all that. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And then I think too, because we're talking about like how this brings things up and it helps us find clarity, I was wondering how, because we're also talking about relationships today, how breath work might help us to improve our relationships as well.
Yeah, so really, I believe it is just that exactly what we were talking about. It's you taking the time for yourself, which then, if we look at the after effects, it's going to improve any relationship, whether it's to yourself, which is very important, it's the most important relationship, or to the relationships around you. If you're taking that space and committing to yourself, you're committing to your growth. Um, and these things are maybe coming up for you through the breath work, like, oh, I should maybe do this, or this was shown to me, or I felt this way, or I needed to move through some emotions that were stuck there, and now I'm feeling a little bit more clarity after that. I'm feeling like I have a better idea of where I'm headed, or whatever it is. Obviously that's going to affect your whole outer view, right? So in a general sense, that's exactly what it does for your relationships.
I love that. Yeah, it makes sense that like when we are feeling more at peace with ourselves, we have a bit more patience and understanding for others. So that totally makes sense to me.
Yeah, yeah.
And then I'm wondering too, just in general, for anyone who's not aware, what would you say is the definition of a conscious relationship?
So I would say the definition is definitely growing together. So growing together, not apart. And communication. Obviously, we've heard that before in terms of relationships. Communication is very key, and it brings things to the surface, right? If we're holding back, we're not speaking our truth, we're not talking about our feelings, then it's not conscious because it's not open and we're not aware of it. And being in a conscious relationship, I believe, is letting each other have space. Like, letting each other have that space to grow on your own. So then you can then come together in that growth as well. So, yeah, that's a few little things, but I think it really is like the overall of what a conscious relationship would look like.
I think that's such a good explanation. And I like the idea of leaving the space for ourselves within the relationship as well, and having a bit of that flexibility and being able to feel like two separate people, but coming
Yeah.
together. I like that you said the basis is growing together. I think that's really beautiful. And I think that's such just a really great way of describing that. And then I was wondering, like, let's say you're meeting someone new and you decide to enter into a relationship. How do you go about building that from the beginning, that kind of openness?
Yeah, so back to communication is so key. And if a friend comes to me and they ask me about like they met someone new and they're asking for advice that way, I always suggest communication because I mean, it sounds like such a general term, but the thing is, what I mean by that is like actually putting it all on out on the table. There doesn't need to be any games or you should be this way and he should be that way, or however it is. I think we hear so much from outside on what it should, like, basically that games are normal, or that you should act a certain way. I don't believe that at all. I believe that, as simple as it is, if you're meant to have a relationship together, you're meant to have a relationship. And it's not about like who's being more cool. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
because you can see past that, right? And that's, comes with maturity and all of those things as well. But having the communication where you can talk about what each other's values are. Like, what are your core values? I think it's, it wasn't something I asked on the first date, but like, but it's important to look at those. Like, what does this person value and get a sense of that? and talk about where you have things in common, because I used to have this idea that, being so different was almost a better thing because it would pull you into like, oh, these things that maybe I wanted to try or do, that they're so that, and I'm the opposite. But for me, what I've realized is that it is really nice to have some commonality, right? And for me, it's even just like the very simple things, from going for a walk, or like, someone who likes walks because I like walks. It's so simple,
Yeah.
right? Or someone who, likes to travel, or likes to go to a good concert or something. Like the things, like just like small things that actually make a big difference. If you're like so opposite that your person is listening to this music that you hate or something, and you're just like all the time, like those things can end up being like, I mean, it's not a big deal, but it's just, and it depends, obviously. Like, I'm saying what works for me in that sense, but commonality is something that I think, in the long run, it's going to make a big difference. What I suggest to people, starting out in a new relationship, is to get curious and ask a lot of questions. I think that in general, we're told that we shouldn't, we shouldn't ask those questions. Um, but asking questions and getting curious is how we learn, and how we learn right off the bat whether someone has those common goals, values, what they're striving towards. And some of the big questions, like, again, maybe not your first date with a person, but you want to know pretty soon, within that range of when you first meet them, is like, do you want to have children? Are you set on where you live? Some of these are the big things, because if you're choosing to be in union and partnership with someone, that is going to matter, right? So are they flexible on their position right now, or are they firm? It's good to know right off the bat, so that you can be like, okay, they're aligned with me and where I'm headed, or they're not. And use your intuition. I think that at the beginning we can become in that space of, what do they call it? Like when you're just, yeah, the butterflies, and you're so like,
Yeah.
you're swooning, right? And it's like, so you can be in that, you can have that, but don't push your intuition aside, right? Like really feel into it and take that space, and maybe like calm yourself down, sit with it, and come into awareness, right? Because you don't want to be meshing with that person that, you're taking on all of what they want because of your excitement or something, and forgetting about yourself, right? You matter, and what you want is why you would obviously look at a long-term relationship with someone. And yeah, again, just like asking maybe what their goals are and their visions. It doesn't have to be super clear, but just to see if you're, on the same page, and you can envision yourself with them in some of their long-term visions and goals.
That's so important. And I love that you said to be curious and ask questions, because I did an episode that came out this week about the Four Agreements, the book. And for me, I am coming out of a relationship. I have a lot of life changes happening. And I was like, this is a great starting point. And one of them that was so important is the third one, which is don't make assumptions. And part of that is that we are afraid, and that we feel like it's not safe to ask questions.
Mhm.
And I think that was such, when you said that, I just like was like a light bulb. And it's like, it's true. Like the number of times that people are like, it's rude to ask that, or like, don't scare them away with the questions right away. But I think
Yeah,
anybody that's scared by those questions probably isn't ready for a long-term relationship. I think, like when you
exactly.
said that, it just like came to my head. I was like, wow, that's such a good point. Like that, being curious and making sure that like what your vision is and like their vision is at least compatible, even if it's not the same. I think that's so important.
Exactly. We can be oh, I shouldn't say that. But if you're noticing them, you ask a question and you're noticing them getting all uncomfortable about it, and maybe the answer they're like, no, or yes, or whatever. But like use your intuition to be like, okay, that person, maybe they're not clear on that yet. And maybe that's okay with you. Or maybe it's not because you really feel like I'm set on this. Like I want to have a kid and I want to, live in a greenhouse or whatever it is, right? So
Yeah.
you're getting that feeling right from the start because a lot of the times when we bypass our intuition, of course, down the line, we're going to be like, oh, you know what? They kind of gave me that sign, right? So if we can
Yes.
stop ourselves from getting to that point, I don't believe that anything's necessarily a waste of time because we learn
No.
from everything and we grow. But, like just if that is a pattern of yours to notice it and be like, oh, I don't really ask questions. And then later on, they show me who they really are. And it's like, okay, well, maybe the next time you'll be asking a lot of questions and not be worried about it. I think we get so like, well, I don't want to ask that question because they might abandon me, right? Like the full on abandonment. And it's just like, they're not going to like me if I ask that question. Well, if they don't like you, that means that, okay, you're not the right person for me, right? Like we just need to sit
Yeah.
with that and just be like, okay, so thank you for showing me that
Yeah.
you're not my person, right? And be grateful for that. So it's just a reframe on the way we're looking at it, right? It's not like this you suck and I don't, kind of thing, right? It's like, okay, we're just different and we're not meant to go there and that's okay, you know?
Yeah, I think that's so important to think about, like the fact that we would rather find out early rather than later. Because, like, when you think about it, I think too, we learn about ourselves at the beginning of a relationship too. And sometimes that's what can scare us away too early. Like, if you catch your own patterns too, like if somebody asks about something and you feel sensitive about it, then it's like asking yourself, why am I feeling this way? Like I should be able to answer this question, or maybe I need to do some breath work, or, reach out for some support because I clearly have some things to work through.
Yeah, totally. Noticing that within yourself too and working through that. Exactly.
Yeah. And then I was thinking too, because obviously we have relationships with a lot of different people. Like we have friends, we have family members, and there's a lot of like existing relationships. And then when we get to this point where we're trying to act more consciously, how do we kind of invite that into relationships that already have like established patterns or that we've had like long term already?
So do you mean like if
Like
we
if we are having, if we're now like on a path where we're like, okay, I'm going to be more authentic, I'm going to be showing up as myself. But now you have these people around you that are used to you being a certain way, or they're used to the communication dynamics that you already have. And then like now you're like trying to kind of make those relationships more conscious.
okay, so you're changing and they're like, who dat? Who's the you?
Yeah.
Who's the new you?
Yeah. Like, do you have any thoughts about that kind of dynamic?
Yes, I do for sure. It kind of goes back to what I was mentioning before. Like if the person in your life, whether it's a family member, exactly, a friend, like you were saying, it's like if they're not okay with this new you because you've grown and you've changed and you've become more your authentic self, then it's likely you're not aligned, right? And I know that this is kind of like can seem cutthroat to some people, but basically, my mentor in my life was my aunt, and she had mentioned this to me when I was growing up, when I was in high school. She said, surround yourself with people that make you feel good. And it's just like this one sentence that literally changed my life because I was around some people that weren't making me feel good. And I just let it be because I just wasn't there yet, right? Like in myself, and I let it happen. And I also realized that for me, the other saying of like blood is thicker than water or whatever that
Oh yeah.
that that isn't how I go about my life. It's like, of course, family means something to me, but really it is about like a soul family, in my opinion. It's like, you know, I will surround myself with people who make me feel good, whether it's my family or not. If you're a family member and we don't vibe, then we don't vibe, right? We're just not in alignment. If I can't be myself around a person or speak my truth in a way that I feel that I would like to, then I would look at that and I would say, like, okay, maybe I enjoy this person for certain things and being around them in this way, or maybe it's a time to look at the fact that we're not aligned, and it doesn't mean like I need to not like the person anymore or just like, cut them off and just be like, you're done and it's brutal. But like maybe it's just like you're kind of growing in your own directions, right? And at one point in your life it made sense, and now in life it doesn't. And that's okay, because for me, growth is just, and transformation is such a big part of my life that if people aren't okay with that, then I'm not going to work at making that relationship okay when it's like, that doesn't feel good to me to give my energy to something that's not okay with who I am. You know what I mean? So yeah, I think it really is, yes, that's a hard part of it, is like, oh, okay, maybe this friend, I don't really see them in my life anymore. And I think, it just happens on like in subtle ways where you just might not talk as much, and you can kind of like, not ties, but you sort of fade from the relationship, and that's fine, right? It's like you're just on two different paths. And yeah. So did that answer your question?
Yeah, yeah. I think that that is important to note, that it doesn't matter what the original relationship was. If it's not aligned anymore, then it might just not be aligned anymore. And I think that's a really good thing to tune into, because I think something else you said, where maybe some people are in our life for particular things, like maybe we have a group of friends that we like to just have a brunch with here and there, and that's
Yeah,
fine. But
totally.
it doesn't mean we have to tell them all of our deepest and darkest fears and thoughts either. Like sometimes it's just a matter of deciding what you're okay with within that relationship, and like what you feel like sharing. But I think you're right. If you feel like you can't be your authentic self around someone, then that's definitely a huge red flag. Because now that I'm thinking about it, it does make sense, because if you were to evaluate your existing relationships the same way you would with a new person, the same red flags are still red flags. It's just, we tend to let things go if it's someone that's been in our life for a long time.
Exactly. And yeah, if you look at any of your friendships that you have in your life, clearly there's that like friend that you love to go to brunch with. And there's that other
Yeah.
friend that maybe you like, and you sit and you talk spiritual stuff all the time, and or what you're going through and all the growth and all that. And not every friend is going to be the same, you might talk to this other friend about I don't know, communicating and what that means, and like whatever it is, some things that, or some topics that you enjoy. But if you start noticing that the person that you're going to brunch with, maybe you don't need to have those like spiritual conversations with, but if you can't feel like you can be yourself authentically, then okay, maybe I need to look at that, right? Like where you feel like you kind of have to be someone else, is what I mean, then
Yeah.
that's probably not right. But if you feel like you can go and it's okay to not have, like, obviously, like, even just thinking about my husband and I don't sit and talk to him about, I don't know, fairies and and aliens and like whatever comes to my mind in that moment all the
Yeah.
time. But we have these other things that we have in common, and that works. It doesn't mean that you have to have everything in common with everyone, is my point, but it's just,
Yeah.
can you be yourself and feel good about who you are, that you don't have to change or manipulate who you are to be comfortable in a situation, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's so important. And I think it goes back to that original point you were making before about commonality. And like, yeah, you don't have to have everything in common, but if you're with someone and you're struggling to have anything to talk with them about, then that's a problem for sure
That's a
in
red
any
flag.
situation.
Yes,
Yeah, definitely. And then
totally.
I know something I wanted to ask you about is that I know you have now relationship readings that you're doing. And I was wondering what those entail and like what that's like to have one of those readings.
I read energies. So if you come to me for one of those relationship readings, it really is about, the relationship to yourself, or the relationships around you, like we said, if it's friends, a coworker, a boss, and what I pick up on is where you're holding any energy that isn't serving you. So what often will happen is I will pick up someone's energy within your aura, and whether it's supportive or whether it's where you're leaking energy, and where you need to take a better look at that in creating boundaries. We will look at some of your patterns around that, how you can shift that, what the learning is within that relationship. Basically, what it helps with is that a lot of the times is that we are unconscious about it in a way. Like, maybe you have a parent who's like kind of really in your business a lot of the time. But you actually kind of like, it becomes so normal in a way, like a habitual thing where you're like, oh, there she is again. Like, there's mom
Yeah.
or whatever. But I will pick up on that energy right away, and I can really feel it close to me when I'm reading for people. And it just brings it, into awareness. And it's like, oh, okay, yeah. Maybe I didn't really realize that energy was draining me, that it's bringing me down. Really, it is about getting to where you want in life. And a lot of the times we're unaware of what is creating like that psychic weight on us, right? Like that heaviness. And it's about clearing it and doing, some energy work around that. So I'm like a detector, like a detective on like what energy is coming in and what that feels like, and how you can move through that and then become the best you, to get you to where you want to be.
That is so incredible because I think what we're talking about with like being conscious versus unconscious, it can be really hard to figure out something that you can't see, right? I talk about this with shadow work all the time. Like people are like, how do I start? And that's why they need the coaching, right? Because it's like, you want to do the work, there's something that's not working. And I think with relationships, that's something that's so important because we do tend to not see at things that we're used to. And like you said, those patterns that just keep lurking that we don't know we're engaging in are
Mhm.
so hard to see. And I think that's such a great offering because I think, especially for people who are empathic or really sensitive, the smallest habit or pattern or something that we see as like normal can probably be taking up a lot more space than we think. Do you find that that comes up a lot where people are just not even aware of like the little things?
Oh yes, yeah. Yeah, and sometimes, it takes them it takes them that time after the fact too, to just be like, "Oh, and to think about that. Like, yeah, I didn't realize." Like for me, it's like if I'm picking up on that, I know right away that there's something there. It's, because why would I feel that? Um and yeah, it just takes them some time to really sit with that, and look at, do I need to change things in my life to support me in getting to where I want to go. And it could be something small that we don't realize. We think it's small, but it's actually, like I said, draining and leaking our energy field, like our aura. And yeah, it's interesting because this is something that's come up for me more recently on my path is this relationship stuff is and connecting with that. I started to notice that it just kept on coming up and I was like, "Oh, it's weird like how I'm feeling, a partner or your mom here that's still alive." and
Yeah.
and tuning into that energy. So I realized that there was something there. It's just like picking up because, like, again, I know I'm reiterating the same thing, but if we don't realize and look at that, often we're not moving forward the way we want to. If you have, say, a parent that's in your business, like I was saying, and kind of always being like, well, are you sure you should do that? Or then you're always going to be like pulled in that direction and not getting where you want to go, right? Because mom's over here telling you, and like she's protective, but that's her
Yeah.
own stuff too, right? Like we don't realize how much we might be enmeshing with someone and taking on their energy. And it's like a constant thing to move through that and just clear that.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Yeah, it's always the reflective part of it that we can't do without someone pointing something out. Like we can't take that
Yes.
time to reflect and see what it is if we don't know it's a problem, especially if we've grown up with it, like you were saying, like with a parent or a family member, someone who we've had a relationship with most of our lives. We don't see it as a problem if it's like normal, like if that's just like what
Yeah,
we're used to, where we don't realize that there's a healthier way of going about that.
totally. And yeah, and I just help, with guidance and support around that because exactly like you say, it could be quite quote, air quotes normal for us or
Yeah.
we were the caretaker or, we were this person in this person's lives, but we have our own journey and our own destiny here, and we're here to create that for ourselves. It can't always be that we're focusing on everyone else, right? Like there needs to be a good energy exchange between the support that you have in your life, the friendships, your parents, your partner. So yeah, I think it's really relationships really are a big deal. Like it sounds so like, but really, there's so many that's like makes up our lives, right? But
Yeah.
and yeah, even just like kind of going back to just our talk about relationships in that way, it's like I think we really need to notice, and how I was saying, like to give each other space is so important. It's because, like,
Hmm.
you know, we did come here with this uh, destiny, and it's not that it doesn't like include other people or they support you in this way, but it is your very own, right? And if we keep on like enmeshing and doing what other people want us to do, we're not getting to where like our soul came here to work through and create, right? So it's so important to realize that we're all here and we all have these different destinies, and to just give people a space with that. Like we can't take care of everyone and we can't change everyone, and we're not here to do that. Like yes, we can support, but um we got our own stuff to do, right? So
I think that that's a really good point, that like we all have to really at some point realize like I have things to do here on earth, and like we sometimes, like you said, get in the habit of just like spending all of our time and energy in relationships. And I think because we are talking about that, I think what's coming to mind just in general for like working with you is that you seem to really focus on like clarity and like really helping people tune back into themselves. And I don't think we generally see relationships as being something that takes us away from that. Sometimes like we assume that we're supposed to put our energy into relationships, but we forget about that like point that we're each on a path here where there's things we're supposed to do, and that can be sometimes confusing if we're being told all the time like it's so important to spend time with other people and to like give your energy. But at some point you run out and then you're like, what am I doing with my life?
Totally. It's energetic self-sovereignty, So, and I think that's so important in so many ways. To look at where we're leaking our energy. We were kind of having a talk about that before we recorded, about just morning habits and like, whether we're leaking our energy into technology and it's taking us in, or, the television or whatever it is. Like, that's a relationship too, right? Like, you've got to have healthy boundaries and decide whether it's uplifting you or it's really dragging you down. And it's the same for any relationship. So I think that's like the theme right now is energetic self-sovereignty. And we know that we're here in changing times, and how can we be more grounded in ourselves so that we can then obviously be the support needed if people need it, but in a common, like, balanced energetic exchange and go from there. So yeah.
That's awesome. I really feel like when you were talking, how you were saying how this was just naturally coming up in a lot of your readings, I feel like that's like spirit crumbs kind of like leading you to that, like, this is the work you're here to do. And I think you being a conscious person who's very aware of patterns and things, obviously you've done a lot of work on yourself and you're in your own energy. That's how you pick up on spirit crumbs and pick up on those things, as you see like, oh, I'm being shown this like a lot of times, like,
Yes.
this is obviously something I'm meant to follow. I
Yeah.
think that's a really important, I think you're a great example for that, because I think sometimes we're not tuned into our own energy enough to see what the patterns are. And I think that's part of what leads us into the trouble of getting enmeshed with other people and not seeing that.
Yes.
And then I was wondering too, like, I know this is the Spirit Crumbs podcast. Can you think of any just Spirit Crumbs fun or big, whatever, that comes to mind that you've had an experience with?
Yeah, for sure. When I left my corporate job, I was definitely very afraid to do that. And I got all these signs all the time. It was like things were just lighting up, and I can't remember all of them because it's been a couple years now. But I I really felt like, everyone has the numbers thing, but the numbers thing was just popping up everywhere. I'd look at a house and it would be like 222 and, like the double numbers, and just like seeing that everywhere. And I would see it with like the animal. I get a lot of like animal spirit kind of messages. So I would see an animal and I'd be like, okay, what are they telling me? And so a lot of that was like really firing off around that time. And it was when I was opening up even more so to like, I think it was right around when I had started actually astrology. I took my first course in Vancouver, and I started meeting up with the girls after the course was over, and we would get together, and it was like totally just like witchy vibes, but we were doing like we were channeling the planets, which is, I know it's weird, but but I the messages that were coming through by channeling the planets, I was like, oh, this is very interesting. I guess I can do this. Like I had already been starting to work on my psychic abilities, but that was really opened me up. So I was like really starting to just feel more connected to my abilities and the intuition, and like, okay, I definitely need to like listen to what this is telling me, as scary as it is, and have trust. And so yeah, just like in terms of those kinds of signs that I'll get. And another fun one, but it came through grief, was that my husband and we lost our dog. I guess it's been about 2 years ago now, and or a year and a half. Anyway, we were in just a lot of grief around that. We had like Maggie was 16 years old, so we spent like a lot of time with her. She was,
Aw.
very important part of our lives, and we were in a lot of grief. So we were we would get up in the morning after like crying in the morning when we wake up, and we would go for these long walks just to move the grief. And on like the first day, I was like, okay, I need to see a heart. And we were just on our walk, and there was like a playing card on the ground that was like the Queen of Hearts, and just like
Wow.
right in front of me. And then we sat, like this was all on the same day too, just like so many signs. And then we were at the park and we sat down, and there was a food truck there, so there were some people gathered around. And this, we could hear this guy like loudly talking, and he starts talking about this dog. And he says this, the name of the dog, and he shows a picture of the dog to the other person, and it kind of looked like Maggie. And my husband was like, oh my gosh. He's so when my husband got Maggie, he had her before I met her. So he adopted her. She came with a different name. Like, you know how, anyway, he changed her name to Maggie. And I actually, in this moment, don't remember what it was, but she had this other name. And that's the name the guy used. Like, he was like, oh, this
Wow.
dog named whatever. And it was the name of that Maggie was given to him as. So it was just like, oh my gosh. And then we walked like further up the road and turned around the corner, and there was this like huge heart on the street in like rose petals.
That is
Yeah,
so random.
so
I
random.
love that.
And then my husband was like, wait a minute, like you're getting all these signs, like I need one, I need one. And he was like, so he was like, I want to see a rabbit. And then right away, like he saw a rabbit on like a mural and things like that. So it was just really sweet, you know, because we really felt her around. And then yeah, and just in general, like if I really feel an intuition that like something's coming, or I want to create something, I'll start to get signs around that. Like, again, by hearing someone talk when I go into a store, or as I was telling you before we got on the recording about like my massage therapist being like, you know, saying a few things to me that was like, it was totally in a line, and like she was like inviting me to something with what I was thinking about. So, yeah, it's just paying attention, right? Because usually there are small little nuggets, and you can also ask for those signs too, right? Like in the beginning, I remember years and years ago just being like testing it out and being like, okay, if I'm on the right path, show me feathers. And then I would just everywhere start seeing them. And whether or not, like, you know, feathers, of course they're on the ground and whatever. But the fact that they were just like placed in front of you in a way and you're noticing them, then they're there for you, right? And just to trust that. So, yeah.
I love that. I think it's so beautiful to get signs from loved ones in spirit, because it's one of the ways that we're able to communicate where it's like a physical thing, like a tangible thing that we can see in front of us, that we're like, yes, because we can always feel them around us, but it's just nice to have that like external sign as well. I did a whole episode on ones that have come up for me recently because they've been coming in different ways. But the one thing that I want to point out that I think people should pay attention to is the fact that you were talking about overhearing conversations that are relevant to you. Because I think a lot of times we don't, like, we're so in our own head and so like overthinking, and like even when we're walking around, we're still like in our heads, we're not really like open to what's
Mm-hmm.
happening around us. And I think, like you were saying, it's so easy to miss those small ones when you're not open and aware.
Mm-hmm.
And I love those examples. I love them so much, especially the overhearing conversations, or like when somebody invites you to something that's exactly what you've been looking for. Like those are so fun. I love them.
Totally. And you know, I was asking spirit the other day, like, you know, like how the magic can come in. And again, it's just like it is there. The response was like, get quiet, get present, you know. And a lot of the times, like we were talking about, there's just like so much that's around us, like coming at us in a way. And so, but we can make boundaries with that, and just if we can take the space, like we don't always have to be walking with our headphones in. We can listen to nature instead, and see what signs are there for us, right? So, yeah.
I love that. Yeah, I actually have made a habit of when I go into nature, I purposely don't have headphones in. And I've found that I've had a lot more things like where I'll hear like I thought about it the other day because I didn't have my headphones in and I heard a sound in the bushes and I looked over and there was a rabbit and I was like, I would not have seen that if I had my headphones in because I didn't see it first. I heard it first. And I think like because I receive a lot of messages like claircognizantly or clairaudiently, I was like, that makes sense that I should be, if I'm looking for signs and I'm trying to get guidance, if that's how I receive signs, then I can't put headphones in and expect to like know what signs are coming at me because I'm not overly clairvoyant and I'm not overly like, like I don't get a lot of things that I see. A lot of it's like things that I hear. So yeah, I think it's so interesting to have like a combination of things coming at you where you're like, okay, if I'm hearing something and seeing something and someone else is telling me something, clearly I'm on the right path here.
Yes, totally. Yes, I agree.
I love that. And so if somebody is getting the pull to work with you, can you just talk a little bit about the offerings you have and then how people can find you?
Yeah, for sure. So, relationship readings we talked about. I do something called the signature session, which is similar in a way. It really is like looking at where you're stuck and where you can get clear. I generally have like clients that are interested in more like getting connected with themselves and getting clear so that they can create a job or career that they love. So like working more towards that in direction, entrepreneurs, that sort of thing, creative types. But really it's open. It's just about like getting unstuck, right? And with that one, I will utilize your birth chart. So like we can look at your astrology within that session, and those ones are a little bit longer sessions. And then I have breath work, as you mentioned, so one-to-one. I do offer group offerings online, which is great, so if everyone can join from wherever. And those just pop up kind of whenever I'm feeling it. I'm very much like a person that works on how they're feeling, and I go from there. So I do have one coming up in October. I know it's a ways away, but I also just wanted to be cognizant of the fact that like a lot of people are in summer mode right now and away.
Yeah.
And it's really hot to be like sitting there doing breath work. And then I also offer workshops, kind of doing new things all the time. Right now I've done an intuition workshop, and I've got another one coming up in September as well. So you can check my site for that. And my site is jennyDmiller.com. And my Instagram is at jenny.d.miller, because you know how Instagram just Jenny's a popular name. So
yeah. That's awesome. Yeah, I'll definitely put that in the show notes so people can find you. And I know I had a breathwork session in the initiation circle with Jenny, and it was really amazing. I felt a lot of energy moving. And so if that's something you feel called to, and then obviously relationships, if you're really feeling drawn to that work, I know a lot of people are looking for support. So thank you so much, Jenny, for coming on to talk about this today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for joining me on another episode of Spirit Crumbs. You can find me on Instagram for this podcast at Spirit Crumbs, or you can also find me at Concrete and Crystals for my own spiritual offerings and more tidbits about my own journey. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.